16-year-old David Johnson had always been different from his classmates at Westfield High School. While other kids his age were obsessed with social media, video games, and weekend parties, David found peace in the quiet corners of the school library. Every lunch break you could find him there, surrounded by textbooks and notebooks, his pencil moving steadily across pages as he worked through complex math problems or wrote detailed essays for his English class. David wasn't the tallest kid in his grade, standing at about 5'8" with a slim build that made him look younger than his 17 years. His dark skin was smooth, unmarked by the acne that plagued many of his peers, and his bright brown eyes held an intelligence that teachers noticed immediately. But it was exactly this intelligence that had made him a target. At Westfield High, being smart wasn't always cool. Academic success was often seen as something only the nerds cared about, and David definitely fell into that category in the eyes of many students. He carried his books in a worn leather backpack his grandmother had given him, always organized with color-coded folders and perfectly sharpened pencils. His clothes were simple but clean, usually khakis and button-down shirts that his mother insisted looked respectable. The trouble had started in sophomore year when David began consistently scoring the highest grades in every class. Teachers would hold up his papers as examples, which made other students roll their eyes and whisper comments under their breath. But it wasn't until junior year that things really got bad, when a group of popular kids decided that David needed to be put in his place. The leader of this group was Tommy Richardson, a 6-foot-tall quarterback with blonde hair and the kind of confident smile that got him whatever he wanted. Tommy came from one of the wealthiest families in town, and he was used to being the center of attention. His father owned several car dealerships, and Tommy drove a brand new truck to school, every day making sure everyone knew about his family's money. Tommy's crew included 3 other boys who followed him everywhere. There was Alex, the running back who was almost as tall as Tommy but twice as wide, with arms like tree trunks from hours in the weight room. Then came Ryan, a skinny kid with red hair who tried to make up for his lack of size by being the loudest and most obnoxious of the group. Finally, there was Chris, who was probably the smartest of Tommy's friends but used his intelligence to come up with creative ways to make other people miserable. These 4 had made David's life increasingly difficult. As senior year progressed, it started small. They would accidentally bump into him in the hallways, causing him to drop his books. They would sit behind him in classes and make quiet comments about his clothes, his hair, or the way he raised his hand to answer questions. During group projects, they would make sure he got stuck with the worst partners or sometimes exclude him entirely. But David never fought back. Every time they bothered him, he would simply pick up his books, adjust his backpack, and walk away with his head held high. His mother had taught him that violence never solved anything, and his grandmother always said that the best revenge was success. So David focused on his studies, maintaining his perfect grade point average and preparing for college applications. What Tommy and his friends didn't know, what nobody at school knew, was that David had been training in martial arts since he was 12 years old. After his father died in a car accident when David was in 7th grade, his Uncle Jerome had stepped in to help raise him. Uncle Jerome owned a small gym on the other side of town, where he taught mixed martial arts to kids and adults who needed somewhere safe to learn discipline and self-defense. 3 times a week after finishing his homework, David would take 2 buses across town to Uncle Jerome's gym. The building was old and simple, concrete walls painted white, mirrors along one side, and thick mats covering the floor. But inside those walls, David had learned things that would surprise everyone who knew him as just the quiet bookworm. Uncle Jerome was a former military man who had served 2 tours overseas before coming home and opening his gym. He was a big man with graying hair and hands scarred from years of hard work, but he spoke softly and never raised his voice. He taught David that martial arts wasn't about fighting. It was about discipline, respect, and knowing when not to fight. Real strength, Uncle Jerome would say as David practiced his forms, isn't about beating people up. It's about having the power to hurt someone and choosing not to use it. David had learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which focused on using technique and leverage instead of brute strength. He studied boxing, learning how to move his feet and protect himself. He practiced Muay Thai, developing flexibility and powerful kicks. But most importantly, he learned control, how to defend himself without seriously hurting an attacker. 5 years of training had transformed David's body, though his loose-fitting school clothes hid the lean muscle he had developed. His reflexes were lightning fast, his balance was perfect, and his understanding of leverage and physics made him much stronger than his appearance suggested. But he had never used these skills outside the gym, never even mentioned his training to classmates or teachers. At home, David lived with his mother and younger sister in a small but comfortable house on Maple Street. His mother, Patricia, worked 2 jobs, as a nurse at the local hospital during the day and cleaning offices at night. She was determined to give her children every opportunity she never had, and she was incredibly proud of David's academic achievements. David's sister, Maya, was 14 and looked up to her big brother more than anyone else in the world. She knew about his martial arts training because she sometimes came to the gym with him, though she was more interested in the academic side of things. Maya was following in David's footsteps, already earning straight A's in 9th grade and talking about becoming a doctor someday. The Johnson family didn't have much money, but they had each other and they had dreams. David's acceptance letters to several prestigious universities were already arriving, along with scholarship offers that would make his college education possible. Massachusetts Institute of Technology had offered him a full ride, covering tuition, room, board, and even giving him money for books and living expenses. But as graduation approached, Tommy Richardson and his friends were becoming more aggressive in their harassment. They seemed angry that David was succeeding while they were struggling with their own grades and college prospects. Tommy's grades were barely good enough to keep him on the football team, and several colleges had already rejected his applications. Lisa Bine. Contrast was becoming more obvious every day. While David received praise from teachers and recognition for his achievements, Tommy's group was facing the reality that high school popularity didn't guarantee future success. Their resentment was growing, and David could sense that something bigger was coming. During lunch in the library, David would sometimes catch himself looking out the window at the parking lot, where Tommy and his friends would hang out by their expensive cars. He wondered what it would be like to be popular, to have people want to be around him, to never worry about being picked on. But then he would remember his goals, his family's sacrifices, and his uncle's teachings about inner strength. As he prepared for his role as valedictorian at graduation, David had no idea that Tommy and his crew were planning something that would force him to reveal the skills he had kept hidden for so long. The quiet, bookish exterior that had protected him throughout high school was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. The morning of graduation dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect weather that made everything seem possible. David woke up early, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made his stomach flutter. Today was the day he had worked toward for 4 long years, the day that would mark his passage from high school student to college-bound scholar. In the kitchen, his mother Patricia was already making his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese and toast cut diagonally, just the way she had made it for him since he was little. She was wearing her best dress, a navy blue one she had bought specifically for this occasion, and her hair was styled in a way that made her look younger and happier than David had seen her in months. "My baby's graduating today," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the plate in front of him. "Your father would be so proud." Maya bounced into the kitchen wearing a yellow sundress that made her look older than her 14 years. She had been talking about graduation day for weeks, more excited than David himself sometimes. She carried a small digital camera that she had saved up to buy, determined to document every moment of her brother's big day. "David, you better not mess up your speech," she teased, but her eyes were shining with pride. "I'm going to record everything and send it to all my friends." David smiled, trying to eat despite the butterflies in his stomach. He had practiced his valedictorian speech dozens of times in front of the mirror, in front of his family, and even in front of Uncle Jerome at the gym. The speech was about overcoming obstacles and believing in yourself, themes that felt especially meaningful given his own journey through high school. Meanwhile, across town, Tommy Richardson was having a very different kind of morning. He sat in his enormous bedroom in his family's mansion, staring at the ceiling and feeling a rage that had been building for months. On his desk were 3 college rejection letters that had arrived over the past week, including one from the State University where he had been sure he would get in based on his football skills alone. His grades were terrible. Barely a 2.1 GPA that his father's donations to the school had probably helped him maintain. His SAT scores were even worse, despite expensive tutoring that his parents had paid for. The reality was hitting him hard. His high school glory days were ending and he had no clear path forward. This is all that nerd's fault, Tommy muttered to himself, thinking about David. In his twisted logic, David's success somehow made Tommy's failures worse. If the quiet kid could get into MIT with a full scholarship, it made Tommy's rejections feel more humiliating. Tommy's phone buzzed with text messages from his crew. Alex had sent a picture of some items he had borrowed from his older brother's college prank supplies, stink bombs that would create chaos and confusion. Ryan had made crude signs with offensive messages targeting David's race and family. Chris had mapped out the graduation ceremony layout, identifying the best spots to cause maximum disruption. The plan was simple but cruel. They would wait until David took the stage for his valedictorian speech, then launch their attack. The stink bombs would force people to leave their seats, creating chaos. The offensive signs would humiliate David in front of his family and the entire graduating class. If David tried to continue his speech, they would shout him down with insults and racial slurs. Tommy looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting his graduation cap over his blonde hair. He was still handsome, still tall and athletic, but something had changed in his eyes over the past few months. The easy confidence had been replaced by something harder and angrier. He was used to getting whatever he wanted, and David's success felt like a personal attack on everything Tommy thought he deserved. At Westfield High School, the gymnasium was being transformed for the graduation ceremony. Maintenance workers were setting up hundreds of folding chairs in neat rows, while custodians polished the floors until they gleamed. The stage had been decorated with the school colors, blue and gold, and a large banner reading, "Congratulations, Class of 2024, hung prominently behind the podium. David arrived at school early for the mandatory rehearsal, carrying his speech in a leather folder that had belonged to his father. He walked through the empty hallways one last time, remembering his first day as a scared freshman and marveling at how much had changed. These walls had witnessed his transformation from a grieving kid who had just lost his father to a confident young man ready to take on the world. In the gym, he practiced walking across the stage and standing at the podium. The acoustics were different with all the decorations up, and he adjusted his speaking volume accordingly. Other students filtered in for rehearsal, some excited, others looking bored or nervous. Tommy and his friends arrived together, whispering among themselves and shooting glares in David's direction. During the rehearsal, David noticed that Tommy's group had positioned themselves strategically around the gymnasium. Alex and Ryan were sitting in the middle section about 10 rows back from the stage. Chris had taken a seat on the far left side, and Tommy himself was near the back right corner. David wondered briefly why they weren't all sitting together like they usually did, but he was too focused on his speech to think much about it. The rehearsal went smoothly, with the principal reminding everyone about proper behavior and the importance of making this a memorable day for the right reasons. David ran through his speech one more time, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. Several teachers nodded approvingly, and he felt his confidence growing. After rehearsal, David went home to change into his best suit, a black one that his mother had bought for him at a discount store but had tailored to fit perfectly. Uncle Jerome arrived at the house to drive them all to the ceremony, wearing his own best suit and beaming with pride at his nephew's achievement. "You ready for this, son?" Uncle Jerome asked as they walked to his car. "I think so," David replied. "I just want to make everyone proud." "You already have," his uncle said, placing a strong hand on David's shoulder. "Just remember what I've taught you. Stay calm, stay focused, and trust yourself." Back at the Richardson mansion, Tommy was making final preparations with his friends. They had smuggled the stink bombs and offensive signs into school earlier in the week, hiding them in various locations around the gymnasium. Alex had also brought a small remote control device that could trigger the stink bombs from a distance, making it harder to trace the disruption back to them. "Remember, wait for my signal," Tommy instructed his crew as they gathered in his bedroom. "We want maximum impact when that loser starts talking about how great he is." Ryan was bouncing with nervous energy, excited about the chaos they were about to create. "This is going to be epic," he said. "Finally, that nerd gets what he deserves." Chris, who was usually the voice of reason in the group, had some doubts about their plan. "Are you sure we want to do this? I mean, it's graduation. Our parents will be there." Tommy's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you backing out? After everything we've planned?" No, Chris said quickly. "I'm in. I just want to make sure we don't get caught." "We won't get caught," Tommy said confidently. "By the time anyone figures out what happened, we'll just be part of the confused crowd." As the afternoon wore on, families began arriving at Westfield High School for the graduation ceremony. The parking lot filled with cars as proud parents, grandparents, and siblings made their way into the gymnasium. David's mother, sister, and uncle found seats in the front row, Patricia clutching a small package of tissues that she knew she would need when her son took the stage. Tommy and his friends arrived separately, each carrying concealed items that would soon turn David's moment of triumph into a nightmare. They took their predetermined positions around the gymnasium, communicating through subtle hand signals and text messages. The graduating class assembled in the hallway outside the gymnasium, lined up in alphabetical order and buzzing with excitement. David stood in his assigned position, checking his speech one final time and taking deep breaths to calm his nerves. He had no idea that in just a few minutes everything would change, and the skills Uncle Jerome had taught him would be put to the ultimate test. As the processional music began to play and the graduates started filing into the gymnasium, Tommy sent a final text message to his crew. "It's showtime." The graduation ceremony began exactly as rehearsed, with the school band playing the traditional processional music as nearly 200 graduates filed into the decorated gymnasium. David walked with his class, his heart beating steadily as he saw the sea of proud faces in the audience. His mother's smile was so bright it seemed to light up the entire front row, while Maya held up her camera, already recording everything. Principal Anderson took the podium and welcomed everyone to the Class of 2024 graduation ceremony. Her voice echoed through the sound system as she talked about the achievements of the graduating class and the bright futures that awaited them. David sat in the front row with the other honor students, his leather folder containing his speech resting on his lap. The ceremony proceeded smoothly through the usual traditions. The choir sang the school song, which most students mumbled through, while their families sang along with genuine emotion. Various awards were presented to students for athletics, community service, and academic achievement. David received 3 different academic awards, walking across the stage each time to polite applause from the audience and genuine cheers from his family section. Tommy watched from his position near the back, his jaw clenched tighter with each award David received. Around the gymnasium, his 3 friends were also watching and waiting, their hands moving nervously to check the hidden items they had smuggled in. Alex had the remote control for the stink bombs in his jacket pocket while Ryan clutched the rolled-up offensive signs under his seat. As the ceremony continued, David found himself thinking about his father. He wished desperately that his dad could be here to see this moment. He remembered how his father used to help him with homework at the kitchen table, always patient and encouraging, even after long days at work. His father had dreamed of going to college himself, but never had the opportunity. Now David was about to achieve that dream for both of them. Finally, Principal Anderson announced that it was time for the valedictorian address. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our class valedictorian, David Johnson, who will be attending the Massachusetts Institute of Technology this fall on a full academic scholarship." The applause was warm and genuine as David stood up and walked toward the podium. His mother was crying happy tears while Uncle Jerome nodded approvingly from his seat. Maya zoomed in with her camera, determined to capture every word of her brother's speech. David reached the podium and adjusted the microphone to his height. He looked out at the audience, seeing hundreds of faces looking back at him expectantly. For just a moment, he felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. This was it, his chance to inspire his classmates and honor his family's sacrifices. "Good afternoon, everyone," David began, his voice clear and steady through the sound system. 4 years ago, we all walked into Westfield High School as nervous freshmen, not knowing what to expect. That's when Tommy gave the signal. Alex pressed the button on his remote control, and two small devices hidden near the front of the stage immediately began releasing a terrible smell. The stink bombs worked exactly as planned, creating a noxious odor that quickly spread through the front section of the gymnasium. Parents began covering their noses with programs and tissues, while some started fanning themselves desperately. At the same time, Ryan stood up in his section and unfurled a large poster with cruel words written in black marker. The sign contained offensive language targeting David's race and family, designed to be visible to as many people as possible. Other audience members gasped and pointed at the sign, while some parents tried to shield their younger children's eyes. David paused at the podium, watching in shock as his special moment began to crumble around him. The smell was getting stronger, causing people in the first few rows to get up and move toward the back of the gymnasium. The disruption was spreading as people turned to look at Ryan's offensive sign, creating a wave of confused murmuring throughout the audience. Chris, following the plan, stood up from his position on the left side and began shouting crude comments designed to rattle David and disrupt his speech. His voice carried clearly through the gymnasium, adding to the chaos and confusion. From the back corner, Tommy started his own verbal assault, yelling insults and slurs that made several adults in the audience gasp in horror. His voice was loud and confident, clearly audible over the growing commotion in the gym. David's mother looked around in confusion and growing anger as she realized her son was being deliberately targeted. Uncle Jerome's face had gone completely serious, his military training kicking in as he assessed the threat level developing around them. Maya lowered her camera, tears starting to form in her eyes as she watched her brother's big moment being destroyed. The principal rushed toward the stage, trying to restore order and figure out what was happening. Several teachers were moving through the audience, attempting to identify the source of the disruption and remove the offensive materials. The smell from the stink bombs was now affecting the entire front half of the gymnasium, causing more people to move toward the exits. But David surprised everyone, including his tormentors, with his response. Instead of running away or breaking down as Tommy had expected, David gripped the edges of the podium and began speaking again. His voice was steady and strong, cutting through the chaos with a calm authority that demanded attention. "I can see that some people want to disrupt this ceremony," David said into the microphone, his words carrying clearly throughout the gymnasium. "But I won't let hatred and ignorance stop me from sharing what I came here to say," he continued, with his speech, adapting it on the spot to address what was happening. He talked about facing adversity with dignity, about rising above the people who try to tear you down, and about the importance of education in breaking cycles of ignorance and prejudice. His composure in the face of such public humiliation began to win over the crowd. People stopped moving and started listening. Parents who had been covering their noses with tissues found themselves paying attention to David's words. Even some of the graduating students who had never paid much attention to him before were impressed by his grace under pressure. Tommy realized that his plan was backfiring. Instead of being humiliated, David was somehow turning the situation to his advantage. The offensive signs and stink bombs that were supposed to make David look foolish were instead making Tommy's group look like the villains they truly were. "Shut up!" Tommy shouted from the back, his voice cracking with frustration. "Nobody wants to hear your stupid speech." But David kept talking, his words growing stronger and more powerful. He spoke about his father's death and how it had motivated him to succeed. He talked about his mother working 2 jobs to support their family. He mentioned students who had overcome poverty, discrimination, and personal challenges to graduate today. The audience was completely captivated now. Even people who had moved away from the smell were straining to hear David's words. Several parents were recording his speech on their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something special. Tommy's rage reached a boiling point, His plan had completely failed, and David was actually benefiting from the situation. Worse, people around Tommy were starting to give him dirty looks, clearly identifying him as one of the troublemakers disrupting the ceremony. Unable to control himself any longer, Tommy started pushing through the crowd toward the stage. His face was red with anger, and his hands were clenched into fists. Alex, seeing his leader moving, jumped up from his seat and began following. Ryan dropped his sign and joined the march toward the front. Chris hesitated for a moment, realizing that things were escalating beyond what they had planned. But peer pressure won out, and he followed his friends. The four boys pushed through the seated audience, creating even more disruption as people had to move out of their way. Their intention was clearly hostile, and several adults tried to stop them or call for security. David saw them coming and made a decision that would change everything. He set down his speech notes and stepped away from the podium, moving to the center of the stage. The microphone was still picking up sounds from the stage area, so his next words carried throughout the entire gymnasium. "Tommy, Alex, Ryan, Chris," David said, his voice calm but firm. "You've made your point. But this needs to stop now, before someone gets hurt." The gymnasium fell completely silent. Everyone could sense that the situation was about to escalate, from harassment into something much more serious. Tommy and his friends reached the front of the stage, their faces twisted with anger and embarrassment at being called out by name. "You think you're better than us?" Tommy snarled as he climbed onto the stage. "Time to show everyone what you really are." David took a deep breath and shifted his stance slightly, his years of training with Uncle Jerome automatically adjusting his balance and positioning. He had hoped it would never come to this, but he was ready for whatever happened next. The entire gymnasium held its breath as Tommy stepped onto the stage, his three friends right behind him. What had started as a graduation ceremony had transformed into something nobody could have predicted. Parents pulled out their phones, some calling security while others began recording what they sensed might be a historic moment. David stood calmly in the center of the stage, his graduation gown flowing slightly in the air conditioning. He looked smaller than usual next to Tommy's imposing 6-foot frame, but there was something different about his posture now. Gone was the slouched stance of the quiet bookworm. Instead, he stood perfectly balanced, his feet shoulder-width apart, his hands relaxed at his sides. Uncle Jerome recognized the stance immediately from their training sessions. His nephew had shifted into what they practiced as ready position, appearing calm and non-threatening while actually being prepared for anything. Jerome's heart swelled with both pride and concern as he realized David was about to reveal skills that nobody at school knew he possessed. "Last chance, Tommy," David said quietly, though the microphone still picked up his words and broadcast them throughout the gymnasium. "Walk away now and we can all pretend this never happened. Your parents are watching. Your little brother is in the audience. Is this really how you want them to remember your graduation day?" For a split second, something flickered in Tommy's eyes. Maybe it was doubt, or perhaps the realization that David was giving him an honorable way out. But the rage and embarrassment of the past few months had built up too much pressure. His college rejections, his failing grades, his growing awareness. That high school popularity meant nothing in the real world. All of it focused on David as the symbol of everything Tommy couldn't have. "I'm done listening to you," Tommy snarled and threw a wild punch aimed at David's face. What happened next shocked everyone in the gymnasium. David moved like water, flowing smoothly to his right as Tommy's fist sailed harmlessly through the air where his head had been a split second before. In one fluid motion that looked almost like dancing, David stepped behind Tommy's extended arm, placed his own hands on Tommy's wrist and shoulder, and used the bully's own momentum to send him gently but firmly to the ground. Tommy found himself sitting on the stage floor, completely unharmed but utterly confused about how he had gotten there. The technique had been so smooth and controlled that it looked more like a choreographed performance than a fight. The audience gasped collectively. Parents who had been reaching for their phones to call for help instead found themselves recording what was unfolding. This wasn't the violent brawl they had feared. It was something entirely different. Alex, seeing his leader on the ground, charged at David with the kind of bull rush he used on the football field. At 220 pounds of pure muscle, Alex was used to running through whatever stood in his way. But David wasn't there when Alex arrived. Using a technique Uncle Jerome had taught him called blending, David stepped to the side at the last possible moment, placed one hand on Alex's back and the other on his arm, and guided the charging football player past him and safely to the ground. Alex slid across the smooth stage floor and came to rest near the back curtain, more embarrassed than hurt. Ryan and Chris looked at each other with growing uncertainty. This wasn't going according to plan at all. David wasn't fighting back the way they expected. He wasn't throwing punches or trying to hurt anyone. Instead, he was making them look foolish while keeping them from hurting him. "How are you doing that?" Ryan stammered, his voice cracking with nervousness. David remained, in his ready stance, still calm and controlled. "I've been training in martial arts for 5 years," he said simply. "But I've never wanted to use it to hurt anyone. I still don't." Chris, who was usually the smartest of Tommy's group, began to realize they were in serious trouble. This quiet kid they had been picking on wasn't just book smart. He had skills they never could have imagined. And worse, he was using those skills with such control and restraint that he was making them look like the bullies they truly were. Tommy struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and fury. Being handled so easily by someone he considered weak was more humiliating than any insult could have been. "You think you're so special?" he shouted. "Let's see how tough you are when we all come at you together." Ryan, despite his nervousness, was too committed to back down now. He rushed at David from the left while Tommy attacked from the right, hoping to overwhelm him with numbers. David had trained for exactly this kind of situation with Uncle Jerome. Multiple attackers required different techniques, ones that used momentum and positioning rather than strength. As Ryan approached, David dropped low and swept the redhead's legs, sending him tumbling safely to the ground. At the same time, he pivoted to face Tommy's second charge. This time, Tommy tried to grab David around the waist, planning to use his size advantage to wrestle him down. But David had spent years learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was specifically designed for smaller people to defend against larger attackers. He wrapped his arms around Tommy's head and shoulder, shifted his weight, and executed a perfect hip toss that sent the quarterback sailing through the air to land on his back on the padded stage. The entire sequence had taken less than 30 seconds, and David wasn't even breathing hard. Chris, watching his 3 friends on the ground, made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Seeing a folding chair at the side of the stage, he grabbed it and raised it above his head like a weapon. "Chris, no!" someone shouted from the audience. It might have been his own mother. The sight of the chair changed everything. David's expression shifted from calm control to serious concern. A folding chair could cause real injury, could turn this controlled demonstration into something dangerous. Uncle Jerome had always taught him that weapons changed the rules completely. Moving faster than anyone thought possible, David closed the distance between himself and Chris in 2 quick steps. His hand shot out and grabbed the chair, but instead of yanking it away violently, he twisted it in a way that made Chris's grip useless. The chair flew harmlessly to the side of the stage, clattering against the wall. Chris found himself standing there empty-handed, staring into David's eyes and seeing something he had never noticed before. This wasn't the weak, scared kid they had been tormenting. This was someone with real strength, real skill, and most importantly, real control. "It's over," David said quietly, though his words carried throughout the silent gymnasium. "All of you, stay down. Don't make this worse than it already is." Tommy started to get up again, his pride refusing to let him accept defeat. But something in David's stance stopped him. The quiet kid wasn't even in a fighting position anymore. He was simply standing normally, his hands at his sides. Yet somehow, that made him seem more dangerous, not less. Uncle Jerome stood up in the audience, his face a mixture of pride and amazement. His nephew had just demonstrated everything he had been taught: skill, control, restraint, and most importantly, wisdom to know when to stop. David had defended himself against 4 attackers without seriously hurting any of them, even when one had tried to use a weapon. Principal Anderson finally reached the stage with 2 security guards, though it was clear the situation was already under control. She looked around at the 4 boys sitting or lying on the stage floor. then at David standing calmly in the center, and tried to process what had just happened. "David," she said uncertainly, "are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Anderson," David replied, his voice returning to its usual quiet tone. "I'm sorry this disrupted the ceremony. I never wanted any of this to happen." The audience began to murmur and whisper, parents and students trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. The quiet valedictorian had just revealed abilities that none of them knew existed, handling a 4-on-1 confrontation with the kind of skill that looked like something out of a movie. Tommy looked around at his friends, all of them disheveled and embarrassed, then up at David, who was extending a hand to help him to his feet. The gesture was so unexpected, so gracious after everything that had happened, that Tommy actually reached up and let David pull him upright. "Why?" Tommy asked quietly, his voice barely audible. "Why didn't you ever fight back before? Why did you let us push you around if you could do this?" David looked at him with genuine sadness in his eyes. "Because fighting should always be the last choice," he said. "I hoped we could all graduate without it ever coming to this." The gymnasium remained eerily quiet as security guards helped Tommy and his friends to their feet. What had started as their plan to humiliate David had backfired spectacularly, and now they stood on the stage looking lost and defeated. David brushed off his graduation gown and walked back to the podium, his movements calm and purposeful. "If I may," David said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "I'd like to finish what I came here to say." Principal Anderson looked uncertain, glancing between David and the 4 troublemakers who were being escorted off the stage. The ceremony had been completely derailed, but something in David's demeanor suggested that maybe, just maybe, he could bring it back on track. "Please," David continued, "let me finish my speech. My classmates deserve to hear it, and our families deserve to see us graduate with dignity." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Parents who had been shocked by the confrontation were now impressed by David's composure and his determination to salvage the ceremony. Even some of the students who had never paid much attention to him before were nodding in agreement. David picked up his notes, though by now he barely needed them. The words he had planned to say felt even more meaningful after what had just happened. He looked out at the sea of faces, his mother's tear-streaked cheeks, Uncle Jerome's proud smile, Maya's wide-eyed amazement, and hundreds of others who were seeing him in a completely new light. "Graduation is supposed to be about new beginnings," David began, his voice stronger now than it had been at the start of the ceremony. "It's about learning from our mistakes, growing from our challenges, and becoming better people than we were when we started." As he spoke, something magical happened. The disruption and chaos began to fade from people's minds, replaced by David's message of hope and perseverance. He talked about overcoming obstacles, about the importance of education, and about treating others with respect and dignity. Every word carried more weight because of what the audience had just witnessed. He spoke about his father's death and how it had motivated him to work harder. He mentioned his mother's sacrifices and his sister's unwavering support. He talked about teachers who had believed in him and friends who had encouraged him along the way. But most importantly, he spoke about forgiveness and second chances. "Everyone makes mistakes," David said, glancing toward the exit where Tommy and his friends had been taken. "The measure of a person isn't whether they fall down, but whether they get back up and try to do better." The applause when he finished was thunderous. People weren't just clapping for his speech. They were applauding his character, his strength, and his grace under pressure. Parents wiped away tears while students cheered with genuine enthusiasm. Even some of the faculty members were visibly moved by what they had witnessed. Within hours of the ceremony ending, videos of David's confrontation with the bullies were spreading across social media. Maya had continued recording even during now. The chaos and her footage showed everything from Tommy's first punch to David's final offer to help him up. The videos were shared thousands of times with captions praising David's composure and skill. Local news stations picked up the story. By evening, the anchor on Channel 7 introduced it as a graduation day confrontation that shows the true meaning of strength and character. The footage was edited to focus on David's defensive techniques and his attempts to de-escalate the situation, painting him as a hero who had been forced to defend himself. David's phone started ringing before he even got home from the graduation dinner his family had planned. College recruiters who had already offered him academic scholarships were calling to congratulate him, but there were also calls from martial arts programs at various universities, coaches who had seen the videos, and were amazed by his skill and control. "Son, you've got schools calling that want to offer you additional scholarships," his mother said, shaking her head in amazement as she handed him the phone for the 5th time that evening. Not just for academics, but for martial arts too. Uncle I. Jerome was beaming as he sat at their kitchen table, watching the news coverage on his phone. "You did exactly what I taught you," he said proudly. "You used only what was necessary, you protected yourself without hurting anyone, and you showed more maturity than those boys combined." But the real transformation was happening across town, at the Richardson household. Tommy sat in his room, staring at the wall and replaying the events of the day in his mind. The videos circulating online showed him clearly as the aggressor, the one who had thrown the first punch and escalated the situation. Comments on social media were overwhelmingly critical of his behavior and supportive of David. His parents had already received calls from the 3 colleges that had been considering his applications. All of them were withdrawing their offers, unwilling to associate their programs with someone who had engaged in such public harassment and attempted violence. His football scholarship to the state university was officially revoked by dinner time. Alex, Ryan, and Chris were facing similar consequences. Their families were mortified by the footage showing their sons participating in racist harassment and attempting to attack a fellow student. The stink bombs and offensive signs had been traced back to them, and they were facing both school disciplinary action and potential criminal charges. But perhaps the most significant change was happening in Tommy's heart. For the first time, he was forced to confront the reality of his actions and their consequences. Watching the videos, he saw himself as others saw him, not as the popular athlete he thought he was, but as a bully who had tried to destroy someone else's moment of triumph. 3 days after graduation, Tommy did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He showed up at David's house, standing nervously on the front porch with his hands in his pockets and his head hanging low. David's mother answered the door, her expression wary. She had every right to slam the door in Tommy's face after what he had done to her son, but something in the young man's posture made her pause. "Is David home?" Tommy asked quietly. "I need to talk to him." David appeared behind his mother, studying Tommy's face carefully. There was no anger there anymore, no arrogance or false confidence, just genuine shame and what looked like the beginning of regret. "It's okay, Mom," David said. "Let him in." They sat in the living room, the same room where David had practiced his graduation speech dozens of times. Tommy struggled to find words, his usual easy confidence completely gone. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry for everything. The things I said, the way I treated you, what I did at graduation. There's no excuse for any of it." David listened quietly, letting Tommy continue. "I lost my scholarships," Tommy went on. "All of them. My parents are barely speaking to me. My little brother asked me why I was so mean to you, and I couldn't even answer him. I don't know why I did those things. I guess I was jealous of how smart you are, how everyone respects you. I felt like a failure, and I took it out on you." "What are you going to do now?" David asked. Tommy shrugged, looking lost. "I don't know. Maybe community college. Try to figure out who I want to be, I guess, and start over." David was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything Uncle Jerome had taught him about forgiveness and second chances. Finally, he leaned forward. "My uncle runs a martial arts gym across town," David said. "He teaches discipline, respect, self-control, things that might help you figure out who you want to be. If you're serious about changing, I could introduce you." Tommy looked up in surprise. After everything he had done, David was offering to help him? "Why would you do that for me?" Tommy asked. Because, David said simply, everyone deserves a chance to become better than they were. 6 months later, Tommy was a regular at Uncle Jerome's gym, working hard to rebuild not just his physical fitness but his character. He had enrolled in community college and was earning his first good grades in years. The anger and resentment that had driven him to bully others had been replaced by a genuine desire to make amends for his past behavior. David, meanwhile, had started his freshman year at MIT with not one, but 3 different scholarships. His story had inspired a foundation to create a new grant program for students who had overcome adversity with grace and dignity. He continued his martial arts training and began teaching classes for younger students at Uncle Jerome's gym. The most surprising development came when Tommy asked David if he could help start a new program at the gym, one focused on helping former bullies understand the impact of their actions and learn better ways to handle their emotions. David agreed, and together they created workshops that became a model for other communities. Maya, now a sophomore in high school, often visited the gym to watch her brother teach. She had started training in martial arts herself, inspired by David's example. She was also documenting the transformation program for a school project about redemption and second chances. "You know what the best part is?" Maya said to David one evening as they walked home from the gym together. "You didn't just beat those bullies, you changed them. You changed Tommy into someone better." David smiled, thinking about his father and how proud he would be of the man his son had become.